After fighting for our lives in the First World War, we would be the ones rewarded with the most lands, as our small Serbian kingdom now rules over Bosnia, Croatia and even Slovenia. This would make us one of the strongest nations in the Balkans, both economically and militarily. However, despite forming the Yugoslav kingdom instead of keeping our Serbian roots, ethnic resistance is still a huge problem. There is Slovene nationalism slowing down our economy, Croatian opposition hurting our stability, and lastly Macedonian opposition hurting our ability to implement new laws. And to fix this will be incredibly difficult, especially since experts are suggesting that we need to prepare for war as tensions could soon start rising in Europe. Fortunately, our Prime Minister Milan Stojadinovic has been able to keep calm and is mainly putting our focus on civilian matters, which can later turn useful for our military as well. This was the start of the rapid industrialization program, which will use our current large civilian industry to expand it further. We will also invest into our mining industry, since it is one of the biggest exports of our nation, Macedonian chromium and Dalmatian aluminium. During this time, we received our first important letter from a foreign power. Our small neighbor, the Albanian nation, were looking into the possibility of negotiations around our what they consider Albanian lands of Kosovo and Debar, also hoping for good relations between our nations. Despite being quite infuriated about their demands, we told them that we were currently not open to negotiate about it. However, we still hoped for peaceful relations. On the topic of foreign policy, we also reached out to our neighbors in the west, Mussolini's Italy, possibly the biggest threat to our nation since they occupy Zadar and Istria and are even considering claiming more of our states. So we sent a letter to Mussolini where we told him that despite our conflict over our lands, we hoped for peaceful relations. With us not receiving an answer in the beginning, we also sent a letter to the newly elected Social Democratic government of France, suggesting that they continue their policy of peace in the Balkans with their guarantees on us, Romania and Czechia. Fortunately, they responded quickly and agreed with our proposition. Also, while waiting, we continued our industrial efforts, stepping up our expansion of civilian industries. Then we finally received an answer from the Italians, and it was a quite surprising one. We had expected them being aggressive and claim our lands now that they had the opportunity, but they actually invited us to Rome for further discussions. And so our Prime Minister took the first flight and landed in the city of Seven Hills some hour later. Immediately when arriving, the Italians served us some of the best coffee in the world, so the scared feeling our delegation had when arriving was quickly gone. After a few hours of discussion, we had not only managed to strike a trade deal with the Italians, who were interested in our chromium, but with our Prime Minister assuring them that we wouldn't recognize the Soviet Union and have a Western focus instead, the declaration of friendship was formed between our two nations. So, returning home with also a bag of knowledge in foreign policy, he would immediately set to work on using it for the economic benefit of our country. We would start attracting investors from allied nations, mainly the UK and France, as well as Axis Capital, with the main hopes to attract the Italian coffee to our cities as well. But that was all the economic things we did, because the ethnic resistance has now grown unbearable. Something needs to be done. In order to solve it, there are two camps, those who seek evolution and those who seek devolution. Those opposed to Darwin believe that the divide of our union is too big and want to split it into several smaller kingdoms and republics, all still lightly united but with a lot more independence than now. And the other side seeks to make efforts to unite our people and not disunite us, and since the latter is the only option that will keep us strong and united, we decided to seek evolution. However, before much could be done, foreign policy came in the way again. A civil war was started in Germany after the death of Hitler, and this greatly destabilized Europe. The Czechians sent an ultimatum to Austria demanding free elections, and when they didn't respond, the Czechoslovak troops marched into the country. We were quick to denounce this action, seeing as it destabilized the region even more, and so a previously friendly government was now seen as a threat. The same would kinda happen with Romania. Seeing how their leader was opposed to communism as well, our Prime Minister reached out to him to ensure him that the threat of Tito was under control. During this encounter, he invited us to a wide alliance bloc of democracies across the continent, something which we weren't willing to do as it can risk the fragile peace of the Balkans if we join a military alliance. However, we were still able to strike a non-aggression pact with them. But all this wasn't what worried us. It was the fact that they openly admitted that they wanted to violate the national integrity of Bulgaria. So, extremely scared about the peace in the Balkans being undermined and us possibly being dragged into the wars, we reached out to Italy in hopes to strengthen our friendship, to ensure that at least they weren't planning anything. Fortunately, they were more than happy to sign a non-aggression pact with us, which means our focus can lie in the Balkans. And thus, realizing that the threat of war was bigger than ever, our government finally started switching to expanding our military industry by constructing more factories, because we have a lot to catch up on. However, fixing the ethnic tensions were still just as important, and we could now finally get to work. We started with the most troubling, Croatia and their calls for independence. While crushing the Ustacha would probably be the fastest, it would also be the most costly politically, so we decided to establish a semi-autonomous Banat of Croatia instead, which will also cost significant political power, but at least it will be a more calmer way to quell their calls for independence. We then moved north to Slovenia, where we banned all their nationalist parties. Something which worried our southern neighbor, the Albanians, as they were scared we would ban all Albanian parties as well, fueling hateful relations between our nations. We told them that we didn't seek anything like this, and this was where we remembered their proposal, because why not sell the poor region to the Albanians, making us money and ending all the tensions? But this will come in the future, as we now turn to deal with the Macedonians. Having halted our political progress for long enough, we decided to give them some concessions to finally earn some of their loyalty. So while the ethnic tensions still exist, they are on their way down, which means our government can return to focus on civilian and military matters. Both of these were actually quite interconnected, so we could disguise many military investments as civilian. For example, we expanded both the University of Zagreb and that of Ljubljana, officially to increase education, but unofficially a lot of that money went into military research. We also lengthened the national railways to connect our country, which will help supply our armies. Finally, investments was put into Slovenian industries, both civilian and military. However, more open military reforms were also underway. We started equipping our divisions with far more artillery, 144 more per division to be exact. This was in addition to adding both anti-air and anti-tank support companies. During these reforms, we reached out to Albania in order to discuss Kosovo and Debar. It didn't take long to come up with an agreement despite all the Serbian nationalists at home complaining. We would sell the two regions for one civilian factory, more than both of them have as GDP. This not only made us money but also secured an ally in the south, an ally that we actually need more than ever because war is brewing in Europe. The Romanians have, after invading Bulgaria, managed to form their democratic faction together with not only the Czech aggressors but also Hungary and even Belgium. And while Italy would have been our perfect ally according to our Prime Minister, the Parliament has lost confidence in them after they together with Greece declared war on Turkey and lost Athens for some time. And this left us with a single option left, the French. Unfortunately, the previously friendly government has been overthrown by Bonapartists, but fortunately the new monarch was still friendly with us and he even seeks to ally us. Because his eyes were set on Belgium, allies of the Czechs and Romanians, so he wanted to open a Balkan front against them. Despite this, we decided to join their faction, consisting of Spain and Portugal as well, and we actually managed to persuade them that we didn't have to join a war and that we only allied them to seek protection. Shortly after we joined, Albania did as well, seeking protection from Greek claims on northern Epirus. However, even though we announced that our plan was to stay neutral, we prepared for war against the democracies nonetheless. Mainly by training more infantry divisions and setting up a defensive line so we can start to entrench ourselves. But we also started modernizing our air force, focusing on local producers. Since after the expansion of our universities, some of our engineers were pulling us to the front of aircraft research in the whole world. Then the French declared war on Belgium, starting the war between ours and the Romanian alliance. However, just as planned, we didn't join the war, something which highly infuriated all the Balkan states in their faction. So much so that after 10 days the Romanians broke our non-aggression pact attacked and started justifying on us. Since we weren't at all ready for war with 3 other nations, we called our allies for help, and fortunately with the French being able to quickly destroy the Belgians, and with the Spaniards and Portuguese having enough troops despite an intervention in Liberia, we soon received lots of support. Even the Albanians sent their forces to help us. So confident together with our allies and having had enough with the Czech and Romanian hypocrisy of peace, we joined the war in order to liberate Bulgaria and Austria. The first few days of war were uneventful, with only a few probing attacks from both sides. However, the French, who had in addition to sending over infantry also sent the Chasseurs Alpins, their elite mountain infantry. And after these initial attacks, they staged a big one into Austria, capturing Klagenfurt before we even had the time to send in our own forces. We did, however, arrive in the time to aid them in the Battle of Graz. It was a difficult battle, especially since German communist volunteers were helping to protect the city. So in the end we failed to enter it, also due to a Romanian attack in West Banat. Fortunately, it was quickly held back, and our Iberian allies had additionally already started a new offensive, which had so far reached Sofia. The plan, however, was to liberate all of Bulgaria, so we sent over 3 of our own infantry to help out. Together with the Portuguese tanks and the Spanish mountaineers, we quickly broke through the Romanian defensive line in Pleven. Some day later, the city was already passed, leading to the Romanians completely retreating from Bulgarian lands. This allowed us to march all the way to Varna and liberate the whole of Bulgaria. However, the offensive hadn't stopped there. Our allies successfully crossed the Donau and started closing in on Bucharest, while we tried to enter Dobruja. Unfortunately, without support from our allies, the attack failed. So we moved back to them and started helping them with their crossing over the Danube. We helped them out by pushing north and expanding the beachhead, with the Romanians occupied with defending Bucharest, as both the western and southern borders of the city were under our control. Our own forces met little resistance and we could arrive all the way to the Transylvanian mountains. During this last offensive, great news arrived from home. Our aircraft engineers had designed one, if maybe not the best, modern aircraft in the world. It will immediately enter production in order to secure air superiority over our lands. However, due to our limited industrial capability, this sadly won't be a game changer. Back to the front, since the offensive around Bucharest had started slowing down, we and our allies quickly changed directions. The French started attacking in Timisoara, where we helped them a little, but our main commitment would be back in Dobruja, because this time the Portuguese helped us out. This allowed us to finally break their defenses, and this breakthrough was a big one. Because while Portugal focused on capturing all of Bulgarian Dobruja, we continued north, capturing everything south of the Danube and even crossing it, arriving all the way to Bessarabia and the Russian border, since there existed no Romanian defense in depth. However, unfortunate news would arrive from France. They had managed to crack German intelligence, finding invasion plans and secret documents about talks of the Germans joining the Romanian and Czech faction. And we knew that it was highly likely that this was true, as the Germans had already demonstrated it by sending volunteers to Czechia. So the French, having far too few units back home to defend against an attack, pulled out all of their forces from our lands, leaving us extremely vulnerable. The Iberians, however, did stay, as they had encircled Bucharest, but with it being difficult to enter, and as the Czechs had already started using our weakness to break our defenses in the north and encircle Klagenfurt, they never captured the capital. This, together with another breakthrough in Novi Sad, caused massive panic among the Iberians and even our own army. So our allies, who were still fighting for us, promptly left to help France instead, because the Germans had actually done what the French intelligence had found. They had joined the Czechs and Romanians. And since we realized that we didn't even have a slim chance to hold, we quickly ordered our army to retreat. Not only from Romania and Bulgaria, but from Croatia as well. We will only try to hold the river that goes around Serbia and the mountains of Montenegro and Macedonia. While we retreated our forces, the enemies tried their best to use the situation to crush ours. Fortunately though, most got out unharmed, with only those in Klagenfurt being abandoned. They were also close to destroying 6 more, but they fortunately could flee in time. And this started the hardest chapter in the war for us yet, only compared to the times the Austrians were knocking at our doors. Their main offensives were in our capital and also in the south to capture Macedonia. The first few battles were easily held back and they soon stopped trying to cross over to Belgrade. However, enemy tanks had now arrived in Macedonia, pushing us back one tile and then another, entering the Albanian city of Pristina. This caused a massive breakthrough as we didn't have any defense in depth, forcing us to retreat, abandon Albania altogether and making us lose all of previously southern Bulgaria. They could also use this southern chaos to achieve success in the north, because our defenses were severely understaffed in the west of Belgrade. We tried our best to reinforce the area, however it was too late to stop them from crossing the river. Still, we staged one successful counterattack which at least saved Belgrade. Unfortunately, while our focus was in the north, they continued in the south, capturing all of West Sandžak, leading to only a small corridor being opened between Montenegro and Serbia. They would try to cut this corridor several times the next 20 days, but we held out all their attacks. Because the fight is not yet over, we might have been defeated in Croatia and Bulgaria, but we haven't been destroyed. However, soon the next enemy breakthrough occurred, and it was such a big one it threatened to encircle 3 divisions, forcing us to retreat from Mitrovica and the last provinces of Morova. But what we hadn't realized was that it threatened the corridor as well, because the Czechs now staged attacks from both the west and the east. With the forces being their shock troopers, we stood no chance at defending it, neither to reopen the corridor. And so our forces had been split in two, one part in Montenegro with connections to our allies still available, and the other in Belgrade completely surrounded by enemies. So realizing that if we didn't do anything now, the fight would actually be over, we started working on ways to continue resistance. We will of course try to hold Belgrade to the last man, but if we don't succeed, we need a backup plan. And so we sent away our prince to Portugal to set up a government in exile, also evacuating all troops in Montenegro to France, thanks to the French Navy providing us with enough convoys. And this force of 12 divisions will allow us to continue helping our allies and give substantial legitimacy to the coming government in exile. But all our focus wasn't abroad, because we need to establish a resistance at home as well. We decided to put the base of these operations in the mountains of Bosnia and not in Serbia, because Belgrade hasn't fallen yet. Almost immediately after setting it up, however, internal issues would arise because there were two groups seeking to be the leaders of the resistance. The communists under Tito and the Chetniks with Draza. The choice was of course clear as day. The Chetniks will lead the resistance. Now back to Belgrade, close quarter combat has started as all outskirts of the city are now under enemy control. But this allows us to hold out for much longer, since defending a city is far easier as every meter costs the enemy much more than average. Sometimes our defense was even so strong they had to completely stop attacking in order to resupply. But after about 2 months, their attack scaled up drastically, with even more than 40 divisions including tanks and shock troopers, leading to the slow destruction of our defenses, until it completely collapsed and captured our whole capital. And so, with no more homeland, the government in exile was officially established, and it immediately started working. Most importantly, we set up smuggling routes to the Chetniks to arm them and the people wanting to resist with weapons. But we also started helping our allies in the west. We licensed the construction plans for our fighters to the French, as we had luckily been able to pull them out before our enemies got their dirty hands on them. With a significant amount of factories at our disposal due to this, and as plenty of both locals and expats joined our exiled forces, we will also have the resources to use our 12 divisions in France. But since they didn't need much help due to them already having a successful breakthrough in the Rhineland, they instead sent us on a top secret mission. With the support of their navy, we will launch a naval invasion of Hanover. While we waited for our forces to prepare themselves, 2 things happened. The first was that after lengthy discussions between our allies and the Italians, Italy decided to join our side of the war, opening a Balkan front. Unfortunately for us, however, we weren't allowed to join the Italian advances, which meant they weren't really liberating our territories, but instead just taking them over. The second thing was that the Germans had collapsed, so much so that the French had arrived all the way to Hanover without even needing to naval invade. This caused the Germans to surrender, leaving the war and giving away everything across the Rhine to the French. Because of this peace, a lot of our land in Yugoslavia was also returned to us, as the Romanians and Czechs had left and the Chetniks had taken control. So we quickly sent all our exiled forces back home, and once they arrived, the Italians agreed to transfer all our lands they had occupied back to us. So in a matter of a week or so, we had liberated Yugoslavia, but our enemies still remain, however not for long. The Hungarians were quickly overrun by us and the Portuguese tanks who had re-arrived. We then crushed Romania together with the Greeks as well as entered Slovakia. Czechoslovakia was the hardest to destroy as they tried to entrench themselves, but fortunately the Portuguese tanks together with the Italian army succeeded in the end. And so a peace deal was signed where we unfortunately didn't succeed with liberating Bulgaria and Austria as both entered the realm of the Italians. However, the peace deal wasn't a loss for us. We got to annex Banat and establish a puppet regime in Romania, while also having friendly governments in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And so peace had been restored in the Balkans and our country is finally back to normal again. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and see you in the next video.